Hey YNR fans! Waving hand, welcome to YNR Trends, your go-to spot for the juiciest Young and the Restless updates, shocking spoilers, and all the drama you can't stop talking about. From surprise returns to scandalous twists, we break it all down for you, every day. So grab your coffee, hit that subscribe button, and let's dive right into Genoa City's hottest gossip. According to teasers for The Young and the Restless, we must wonder if Kane Ashby is laying a trap for Victor Newman. Is Kane putting up some extortion bait as part of the scheme? Kane is a clever man who can carry out complex plots because he was able to conceal himself for 6 years under the guise of Aristotle Dumas. At this stage, Kane is used to secrecy and deceit. Kane letting Victor back him into an extortion corner is suspicious because of this. Victor will threaten to reveal Colin Atkinson's last scam on the elderly woman who once owned the chateau and vineyard in YNR's August 25th episode. Victor will believe he has Kane exactly where he wants him because Colin allegedly persuaded her to give everything to him in the will and then assisted Kane in creating his arabesque empire. Unless Kane joins him in opposing Jabot, Victor intends to present the proof to the media and make it public. Kane will, however, respond somewhat oddly to Victor's threat. Kane will coolly remark that it appears he has little option after Victor informs him that it's his call. I knew Kane would see reason, Victor will respond smugly, but something feels a little off here. What if Kane had foreseen this and even desired Victor to find out? Perhaps Kane is attempting to make Victor appear strong and in charge. Kane may be giving Victor a false sense of security by presenting himself as unthreatening. It might be a component of Kane's plan to eventually erode Victor's defense. What better method to launch a surprise attack than to give your adversary the impression that they are in the stronger position? When it came to creating his Aristotle Dumas persona, Kane was extremely careful. This person is not careless enough to be unaware of Colin's purported most recent scam. Kane might just act as though he's been coerced into this arrangement after feigning astonishment. In actuality, Kane may have imagined Victor would fall for this blackmail ruse and set a trail for him to follow. We'll see how Amanda Sinclair fits into this whole scenario, but YNR fans may anticipate that Kane will soon look to her for assistance. Kane could be able to defend himself against Victor, particularly if the evidence was fabricated and isn't what it appears to be. According to teasers for The Young and the Restless, Kane will continue to use cunning tactics as his plot develops, so stay tuned for more information on all the shady developments. One foot in the shadows had always been Kane's. Drama had a way of entangling itself around him like chains, even when he made an effort to lead a tranquil existence. Others would claim that he was just cursed, while others would claim that he brought it upon himself, but this time it was different. This was about power, not only misfortune, heartache, or falsehoods entangled in affairs. It was none other than Victor Newman who stood in the center of his plan. Genoa City was filled with respect, terror, and weight at the mention of Victor's name. He had been untouchable for decades, a king unto himself, controlling everything and everyone until they complied with his demands. Kane, however, had no intention of bending. Not now. For far too long, he had been undervalued, pushed, and humiliated. It was now his turn to pull the strings, create the rules, and see if the legendary Victor Newman would fall into a trap he never anticipated. It began with murmurs. Kane had laid the foundation in silence, being overly cautious. Not even his closest confidants, Jill or Lily, could know. This was too dangerous. He was aware that Victor would smash him before he could even take a step if word got out. But throughout the years, Kane had picked up some important knowledge. Control was Victor's lifeblood, and secrets came with it. Secrets were weapons, not simply vulnerabilities. Kane had discovered a piece of knowledge that was so harmful and hazardous that even Victor was unable to ignore it. It was the sort of thing that could topple the empire of Newman. Kane, however, wasn't going to simply give it to them. No, he was thinking of something better. In order to get Victor to play his game rather than the other way around, he would use it as bait, blackmail, and other forms of coercion. Kane's heart raced every time he considered the plan because it was so delicate, almost too delicate. He was aware that Victor reacted poorly to threats and that he destroyed those who dared to threaten him. Kane, however, wasn't foolish enough to enter the lion's den without anything. He had to plan every action he made and make sure it gave him a way out. Still, it was an exhilarating rush. For once, he wasn't the one hiding his errors or pleading for forgiveness, nor was he the man on the run. That power burst through him like fire, and he was in charge. When the trap slammed shut, he could practically see Victor's face. Since there was no going back now, the thought kept him up at night and kept him planning during the day. It all started when Kane found documents connected to a business transaction Victor had concealed years prior, something sloppy and unlawful that had subtly vanished from the news. Kane had spotted it, whereas most people didn't. Before a larger picture became apparent, he cobbled together bank traces, questionable activities, and bits of information. Victor had done a good job of hiding his tracks, but not enough. Kane was holding the one item Victor could not afford to reappear, evidence that Newman Enterprises had arranged a transaction with risky foreign partners that could have destroyed the business and permanently damaged Victor's reputation. It was the kind of skeleton that could cost him everything he held dear in addition to making him feel ashamed. For Kane, it was retaliation more than leverage. Kane had never forgotten the times Victor treated him as though he didn't belong, looked down on him, and discarded him. Every scathing remark, deceptive action, each reminder that he was unworthy tormented him. Kane now had the opportunity to change the course of events with this weapon. Although he was aware that blackmailing Victor was risky, possibly even suicidal, why live a limited life? He was fed up with being ignored and living in the shadow of other men. Even if it meant risking everything, he could finally stand in the spotlight. Really, this had nothing to do with money. This was done to demonstrate to Victor and the rest of Genoa City that Kane Ashby was a man not to be taken lightly. Kane's strategy wasn't simple, though. He didn't want to merely ask for power or money. That would be too clear-cut and too foreseeable. No, he preferred Victor to perspire. He desired to push the man's boundaries. He therefore created a trap that Victor was unable to avoid, using a combination of timing, deceit, and bait. The first approach was straightforward: raise Victor's awareness without going overboard. Kane whispered just enough information to make him uneasy, a clue that someone was in possession of something hazardous, through the appropriate channels. Victor would hunt till he located his target once he got the smell, therefore it was a risk. Kane, however, was ready for that. Every hint pointed him in the direction Kane desired. Victor was guided farther into the maze by the deliberate placement of each breadcrumb. The meeting followed. Kane planned it meticulously, well aware that people typically complied with Victor's summons. Kane, however, invited Victor in his own manner rather than being called. A hand-delivered letter with the words, "You don't own everything, Victor," with no signature. Not now. Kane's hands almost trembled as he sealed the envelope because of its audacity, but the risk was worthwhile. He wanted Victor to be intrigued, perhaps even irate, but most importantly, unsteady. The secret was to leave the great Victor Newman wondering and unsure. Because mistakes would tighten the rope around his neck, and uncertainty breeds mistakes. Of course, Victor was not easily frightened. His presence filled the room like thunderclouds when he reached the meeting place. He avoided sitting, smiling, and wasting time on small talk. "You have precisely 2 seconds to explain why I'm here," he remarked in a low, dominating, and frightening voice. Even though Kane's heart was pounding, he forced himself to remain composed. He handed one sheet of paper across the table, a well-chosen document that was both fragmentary enough to keep Victor wondering and damning enough to make his eyes widen. "This is just the beginning," Kane remarked quietly. The silence that followed was thick and powerful, like lightning poised to strike. Just think about what the remainder looks like. Cain could sense Victor's eyes weighing him down and making calculations. He was aware that Victor was already preparing a counterattack and considering strategies to turn the tide of the match. However, that was its beauty. Even Victor's strength could turn into a weakness because of the trap that Cain has set up. At this point, Victor did not directly threaten him. Victor wasn't like that. Rather, he leaned back with his eyes narrowed and stated, "I'll give you that you have guts. But in this place, having guts doesn't keep you alive." Cain just grinned, a tiny, sardonic smile. He responded, "Maybe not, but planning does." Victor caught the subtle teasing. Cain wasn't pretending to be a man fighting for his life. Victor was wary of him just because he was composed, steady, and methodical. Cain felt the equilibrium change, even if just a little, for the first time in years. And he continued to advance, farther into the flames, thanks to that tiny bit of power. Character history serves as both the backdrop and the plot's primary driving force in the long-running CBS soap The Young and the Restless, whose complex web of relationships and intrigues is a masterwork of serialized storytelling. Few stories better illustrate this than the intricate and emotionally charged relationship between Cameron Kirsten, popularly known as Cain, and Victor Newman, the patriarch whose name defines the program. The particular incident of Cain's attempt to use a fake secret from Victor's past as blackmail bait to trap him is not a standalone act of villainy, but rather a play in a larger, more intimate game. To examine this storyline is to see that, to Cain, the blackmail was never really about the money or the authority it may temporarily grant him. Rather, it was a complex and brutal work of psychological theater, a painstakingly produced drama intended just for Victor. It was the last, twisted act of a long-running grudge, a scheme to achieve a perverse kind of victory by making Victor become the very monster Cain had always accused him of being, as well as to financially harm Victor and prove a philosophical point. One must first understand the historical background that feeds Cain's hostility in order to completely comprehend the depth of his trap. Their enmity is very emotional and stems from a shared past with Ashley Abbott. It is not just a business quarrel or a confrontation between rival corporate titans. Like all of his relationships, Victor's with Ashley was turbulent, characterized by passion, deceit, and treachery. According to Cain, Victor is the all-powerful force that upends lives without consequence, a guy who feels that his riches and influence give him the ability to disregard the moral laws that apply to others. Righteous fury is the source of Cain's hatred. He views himself as an avenging and a remedy for the cosmic injustice that Victor stands for, in addition to being an enemy. Their dispute is changed from a simple struggle for dominance to an ideological clash as a result of this history. Therefore, Cain's objective goes beyond traditional triumph. By proving that the system's king is a phony, he aims to reveal the system as corrupt rather than win inside the system Victor controls. His weapon of choice for this exposé is the blackmail plot. Cain's plan's psychological accuracy is what makes it so brilliant. Perhaps no one knows Victor Newman better than he does, not even Victor's own relatives. He is aware that Victor's greatest strength, his unwavering faith in his own dominance and superiority, is also his biggest weakness. Power, secrecy, and the unrestricted ability to set terms form the basis of Victor's identity. Everyone else is moved around the board by him, the chess master. The purpose of Cain's trap is to make Victor move. The bait isn't just any secret, it's a well-written work of fiction meant to play on Victor's particular paranoia and his compulsive need to steer his own story and preserve his legacy. Cain creates a ghost from Victor's past, a scandal that could be so powerful that it could tear apart the Newman family's foundation. The genius is that the secret's meaning is essentially meaningless, its strength comes only from Victor's conviction that it might be genuine, that some long-forgotten wrongdoing might come to light. Cain is placing all of his money on his interpretation of Victor's personality, believing that a man who has had such a life of brutal ambition will undoubtedly harbor secrets, and that doubt alone will be sufficient to trap him. At this point, the plan's true nature as a trap instead of a straightforward extortion attempt becomes apparent. A typical blackmailer wants the money's secret to be kept secret and the transaction to be clean. The objective is the victim's quiet. Victor's quiet is the trap for Cain. The win condition is to pay or to give in to the blackmail. Victor would be making a silent admission of guilt by negotiating, sending money, and engaging in the blackmail. The fiction would be validated by him. He would be admitting that his flawless, strong persona is a front that needs illegal funding to keep up. He would then turn into the man Cain has always described him as, a criminal, a manipulator, a man who breaks the law to further his own agenda. Cain sees the money as nothing more than the proof of concept and the mark of surrender. In order to make Victor see the reflection Cain has created, a reflection of a helpless, cornered man buying his way out of difficulty, no different from any other typical mark, he wants to hold a mirror up to him. The strategy also aims to take advantage of Victor's relationships, especially his bond with his family, which he views as the foundation of his legacy and his most valued asset. Victor justifies his entire life's effort by claiming that it is for his family. His main motivation is to keep that family safe from controversy and bodily damage. Cain is aware of this. Without a doubt, the made-up secret puts Victor, his kids, his business, and the Newman name in danger of being mocked and shamed by the public. Cain makes sure Victor can't just brush it off by using heritage as the bait. He has to participate. He needs to carefully balance the cost of exposure against the cost of payment. Victor is forced into a situation where he cannot win, creating his own Kobayashi Maru. He devalues himself and supports Cain's viewpoint if he pays. He runs the risk of the fictitious controversy blowing up and doing irreparable harm to the people he cares about the most if he doesn't pay. As a result, Cain presents himself as a puppeteer rather than a burglar, making Victor dance to a song he has written. The true goal is the suffering of the decision, the tainting of Victor's prized control. Another important component of the plan's psychological torture is how it is carried out. Cain wouldn't just make a demand via anonymous email. The threat of blackmail would be delivered in a theatrical manner, probably designed to make Victor feel as humiliated and helpless as possible. It would be executed in a manner that would remind Victor that Cain is in charge and that he is the one who has gained access to Newman's private life. The undercurrent of their past permeates every exchange and request. Cain enjoys playing the part of the cat in this game of cat and mouse, playing with his victim before what he believes will be the last, symbolic death. As Victor is compelled to compromise, he wants to hear the tightly suppressed rage in his voice and see the frustration in his eyes. This element of personal gloating is important. It demonstrates that the emotional and psychological reward is the real prize and that the monetary benefit is merely incidental. A man such as Victor Newman would inevitably not give up easily. He would respond with a counterplan, a sophisticated web of his own that would be intended to reverse Cain's position. He might seem to agree, cooperating with the blackmail plot while surreptitiously obtaining proof that Cain is a phony. He may conduct a sting operation with his lawyers, security detail, or closest confidants. However, this response is a component of the trap that Cain has set. Cain accomplishes his second goal by making Victor muster up all of his resources and focus all of his enormous intelligence and energy on eliminating this one personal threat. In the process, he swallows Victor. He becomes into the focal point of Victor's universe, the fixation that impairs his judgment and diverts him from his family and business. By forcing Victor to concentrate all of his powerful abilities on him, Cain positions himself as the ultimate enemy, the one that Newman's entire strength was needed to destroy. Cain receives a kind of perverted validation even when he is outwitted. His strategy compels Victor to admit how dangerous he is and to treat him with the gravity that rival billionaires or national governments typically exhibit. Cain would have factored in the plan's possible failure as well. Cain may be jailed for attempted extortion if a man as crafty as Victor could expose the fraud and show the secret is a fake. However, even with this result, Cain may win in part. Victor would still be tarnished by the very public revelation of such a strange and private plot. The same controversy Victor aimed to avoid would result from the media frenzy, social gossip, and unavoidable family strife. It would leave a stain, an odd postscript that would never be completely removed from the history of Newman. Even if Kane loses, he might still prove that Victor's world is brittle and that an enemy with enough will and cunning could upend it. He turns into a martyr for his own cause, demonstrating the distorting effects of Victor's authority. Kane's trap for Victor is ultimately a complex and comprehensive psychological warfare tactic. It is a strategy that functions on several levels, including symbolic, ideological, personal, and financial. The blackmail bait is just a device, a hook made to attract a certain kind of fish. The true strategy was always to put Victor in a situation where every decision he made would make him less valuable. Kane held up a warped mirror, knowing that Victor's reaction to his own reflection would be his downfall, and used it as bait by creating a fictitious account of his own previous transgressions. Victor would lose some of his invincibility regardless of whether he paid and acknowledged his corruption, retaliated and became engrossed in the conflict, or revealed the plot and bore the fallout. This was the only win that mattered to Kane, a man motivated by a hatred forged in the furnace of personal history. The goal was not to make money, but to demonstrate that the great Victor Newman was just as weak and prone to corruption as any other person, beneath the opulence and empire, and that he could be coerced into demonstrating this for himself. Therefore, the trap was ideal in its design rather than its inevitable nature. Regardless of Victor's choice, he would walk himself into the cage Kane had created for him, a cage made of the iron of his own pride and ego.